It was a very busy weekend for the Memphis Grizzlies. Texas two-step, if you will, had an opportunity to go to Houston and take on the Rockets. And the very next night, they headed to Dallas to play the Mavericks. There's some good and some bad to be taken away from both of those contests, all leading up to their third game in 4 nights tonight against the Brooklyn Nets at home. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving coming to Memphis. It's been a crazy start to the season. Let's lock in here on Locked On Grizzlies and break it all down.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Joe Mullinax. I am the co-host of this wonderful show, Locked On Grizzlies. And you will notice that I am flying solo on this episode to Michael Cole. A busy weekend for him, right? Again, as the beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, DeMichael has his hands full covering 2 games back-to-back on a Friday night, Saturday night. So letting him catch his breath a little bit. He'll be back with us to break down Grizzlies Nets going into Tuesday's episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But you're starting your week with me, Joe Mullinax, here, and I'm so grateful that you're with me on this journey. We're going to take through what was a pretty intense 48-hour stretch for the Memphis Grizzlies there in Texas playing some basketball. Some good, some not so good. We're going to get into all of that before we move on to the Brooklyn Nets at home in FedEx Forum Monday night. And obviously the Grizzlies are going to be very grateful that they are back home after that long weekend in Texas. Catch us on Stitcher, Spotify, literally however you get your podcasts. You can find Locked On Grizzlies. We are also, of course, on YouTube. Make sure that you are rating, make sure you're subscribing, all of those fun things, making us helping us, I should say, continue to grow and develop the show. We read your comments. We check out the reviews. YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast, make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing. And also make sure you're checking out our sponsor for this episode today. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. The Grizzlies played 2 games over the weekend that DeMichael and I haven't had a chance to talk to you about yet. In terms of, we previewed those games. Those games were put out on the Friday episode of Locked On, but we didn't have a chance to break them down. So this is how we're going to do it. And both games were very different, right? You left the Houston Rockets game feeling vastly different than you did the way you left the Dallas Mavericks game. So instead of doing one and then the other, I'm going to focus on the good here to start the show, because you want to start your week on a positive note here on Locked On Grizzlies. And then later on in the show, we'll dive into the things that didn't maybe look as good for Memphis in this particular weekend roadie. I'll tell you who looked good regardless. It's Ja Morant. Ja Morant, of course, the legend-esque game that he put together was on Friday night against the Houston Rockets, where he pieced a masterpiece together. He dropped a 49-piece on the heads of Houston there in Houston. He was a plus 23 in 31 minutes of play, which is just crazy. He made 10 of 13 free throws, which shows his continued focus on getting to the charity stripe. That's excellent to see. He was extremely efficient in his scoring, 17 of 26 from the field overall. 5 for 6 from 3 was Ja Morant. And if Ja Morant, if you're listening, I don't need to tell you this, if Ja Morant starts hitting threes, that's terrifying, because you're going to have to start going over on screens on this guy. And he has the elite level athleticism, one of the best athletes, if not the best athlete in the entire NBA. He's going to make people pay, especially with the ball in his hands. I was particularly impressed with his 8 assists. And I know that I've talked about that on these podcast waves with DeMichael before. The idea of continuing to see him not just get his own shot, but put his teammates in positions to be able to finish their own shot. So much of being an MVP, most valuable player. And we'll talk more about another example of that in the next segment. So much of that is making your teammates better. And I think that the Rockets game, as poorly as it went in some ways, and again, we'll save that for the next part of the show, positivity-wise, John Morant made his teammates better. He made John Conchar better in this game. He made guys like Jake LaRavia better in this game. He put them in positions to be successful at times, and they benefited from the gravity that John Morant possesses. So really strong start to the season for Ja, between obviously his first game opening night against the Knicks and then his showing in Houston against the Rockets. But even in a less good team performance, especially offensively, for Memphis and Dallas the following night, he wasn't terrible, right? He was 8 for 8 from the charity stripe in 30 minutes of play, again, showing the capacity to get to the line. He was an efficient 6 for 12 from the floor, 20 points, only 4 assists in this game. But as we'll talk about, that maybe wasn't entirely on Ja, it's safe to say. He did not have his best game, but even his mediocre game at this stage is 20 points on 12 shots. And that is extremely encouraging. The Grizzlies, most nights, maybe not Saturday night, but most nights they'll have a chance to win when they're in a position to have Ja Morant playing at that level. So that was, first and foremost, a massive positive. Shout out to Big 12, excuse me, who just, he looks like an MVP candidate early on in the season, as DeMichael and I have talked about on the show. Another player who has really put together a strong start to their season is Santi Aldama. Now, he wasn't the most efficient scorer across these two games in Texas. He was 3 for 11 against Houston, and he was 2 for 4, so a pretty minimal impact, only 21 minutes played against Dallas. But he has shown the capacity to rebound, 9 boards against Dallas, 6 in limited minutes, as I just mentioned, against the Mavericks. He is effective in terms of playing the rim, defending at the rim. DeMichael has talked about this on recent episodes, the idea of him maybe not blocking every shot. And again, he got 3 against the Rockets, so that's pretty solid. But he is very adept at being able to position his body, defend the basket, make those lanes of sight or those lines of sight to the rim a little bit more difficult to take in if you're the offensive player. And that obviously will lead to more misses than makes. So, or more consistently, more misses than makes. So I've really been impressed with Santi's activity. He's not as good as Jaren Jackson Jr. Nobody's asking him to be. When you look at how Santi is playing, it's something to be optimistic about with regard to when he is in the role he's supposed to be in as a reserve, as that fourth big behind Jaren and Steven Adams and Brandon Clark. He's the guy getting 15 to 16 minutes a game. I think that there's a lot of positivity that can be felt about what he's going to be able to do in that run. He can provide some of that scoring pop that I've been nervous about for the reserves. He can provide some defensive work when it's not Steven or Jaren out there. If it's Santi and Clark, for example, I think Santi can be a good rim protector, especially against reserves. So I really do see that as a reason to be optimistic coming out of these two games in Houston and in Dallas. And then my third major positive is somebody that maybe I'm going to have to eat crow on. I'm going to call me a Christmas guy. But John Conchar so far offensively has let it fly. He attempted 6 threes against the Houston Rockets, only 3 against the Dallas Mavericks. But in fairness to Conchar, he only played 20 minutes in that game. Taylor Jenkins, understandably, as we'll discuss, called it early on Saturday night, so Conchar didn't get as much run. I was impressed, especially against the Rockets, with how willing he was to shoot it, how he was still able to do basic things off the dribble and make opposing defenses respect that aspect of his game enough against Houston in particular to where he wasn't a one-trick pony, right? He had the capacity and the skill to get his looks and take advantage of the opportunities that were being provided by the dribble penetration of John Morant, Tyus Jones, and others. So there was positivity there from Conchar, and there was also positivity from Jake LaRavia in a similar idea. He was 3 for 4 against the Rockets from 3. He was 2 for 5 against the Mavericks. So really a strong weekend shooting for LaRavia. His shooting stroke that we've, all agreed looks pretty stout, looks pretty sweet. He's got good rhythm. He has good feet. He understands how to get into his motion. He's a talented scorer. We just haven't seen the ball go in the bucket. In Texas, it was a mixed bag of success, but LaRavia was an example of here's a guy who is able to provide exactly what we hoped he may be able to provide as a combo 3-4 reserve, 10th man, 11th man. He is going to be in a position to give, again, who's going to score the ball for the Grizzlies, especially from range among that second unit. Conchar and LaRavia both provided reasons to be optimistic on that front. So there were things to be positive about. Again, they won a game on Friday. They beat the Rockets. It was not an easy win for them, but they were able to finish it at the end. And that's what good teams do against teams they're supposed to beat, because eventually you're going to run into teams that you're not supposed to beat, and things will be a little bit more difficult. We'll talk about why that was and other reasons that the weekend was not a complete success for the Memphis Grizzlies here momentarily. But first, I want to talk to you about the daily fantasy site known as Prize Picks. Huge fan of the entries that you can put there on Prize Picks. The player projections, the more or less angle of things, like in this game coming up against the Nets tonight, taking Ja Morant to score more than 27.5 or whatever the amount might be. Steven Adams double-double feels likely, so maybe you have him getting more than 9.5 rebounds. Maybe Desmond Bane breaks out of things, which we'll talk more about Desmond here in a moment. Maybe he makes more than 2.5 threes. Lots of ways that you can go about playing Prize Picks. It's a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of it and how it works. You can pick 2 to 5 players. If they score more, rebound more, assist more or less than the Prize Pick projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any given entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you and the projections that are available. You can go with any sport that you watch, from the NBA to cricket and literally everything in between. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It is that easy. Safe and fast, withdrawals are very, very, very possible using Prize Picks, and they are currently operational in over 30 states as well as in Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Make sure you're checking out Prize Picks today. Positives: Ja Morant, Jake LaRavia, John Conchar, Santi Aldama. Good things shown from players that you're going to need in order for the Memphis Grizzlies to be successful this season. The first negative from the weekend in Texas, and again, the team went 1-1. They are currently 2-1. 2-1 coming out of these first 3 games is a victory, considering they are down 3 of their 7 or 8 best players. Dylan Brooks hasn't played yet this season. Zaire Williams hasn't played yet this season. Jaren Jackson Jr. hasn't played yet this season. Who will play against the Nets tonight? We'll talk more about that here in our final segment. But you have to keep in mind that this team is not at full strength. So to be 2-1 coming out of this stretch, winning games against the Knicks, winning games against the Rockets that you're supposed to beat, and then struggling with Dallas, which even if the team was healthy, that was certainly within the realm of possibility. The Dallas Mavericks are a Western Conference Finals contender, much like the Memphis Grizzlies. We have to keep that perspective. The Mavericks were in that mix last season, we have to recall. And the Mavericks also hadn't played as many games as the Grizzlies. Memphis was on their 3rd game in 4 nights, whereas the Dallas Mavericks had not played since Wednesday, so they had had 2 nights off. So health, rest, all those things come into account, even if the Grizzlies were healthy. But something that is concerning outside of losing to the Mavericks, which, again, that doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the defense, both against Houston and the Mavericks. The Houston Rockets shot 45.7% from beyond the arc against the Memphis Grizzlies. The Dallas Mavericks shot a pretty stout 43.6%. Dallas shot 17 of 39, and Houston shot 16 of 35. So that's 2 games there in Texas that the Grizzlies struggled defending beyond the arc. And it's not like it was just, getting torched by guys that are just going to go off whenever they want to, right? Like Kevin Porter Jr. shooting 50% from three on 8 attempts. That's a problem. That can't continue to happen for the Memphis Grizzlies. You know Jalen Green's going to get his, but you got to limit the other guys. Similar concept with the electric Luka Doncic, who played like he was mad that he wasn't number one on Fanside. It's 25 under 25. I wrote that piece about John Morant. Don't be mad at me, Luka Doncic. I didn't vote. I just wrote the article. Luka very much looked like he had a point to prove with his 32 points on 23 shots, 10 assists, 7 rebounds. Luka looked like an MVP candidate, deservedly so. He's in that conversation, of course. But Luka was 4 for 9 from three. Spencer Dinwiddie was 3 for 5. You're looking at other guys having similar impacts from beyond the arc in terms of more than 2 made threes. Maxi Kleber making 2 threes in 21 minutes. That can't happen. You know that most teams are going to have one dude who you do your best to limit, but he still has the skill set and the ability to handle and create. He's going to be a tough guard. You're down Dillon Brooks. You're down Jaren Jackson Jr. Those are your 2 best defensive players. Should we be surprised that the Grizzlies are having issues defensively right now? Probably not. Probably not, because if you don't have your best perimeter defender, if you don't have your best interior defender, your best rim protector, naturally your defense is going to struggle. And defensive rotations can be slow to come along with young teams that are playing rookies as much as the Grizzlies are playing rookies. Again, in Houston, Jake LaRavia, 15 minutes off the bench. David Roddy, 23 minutes off the bench. Santi Aldama, second-year player who had a much smaller role last season, 31 minutes as a starter. Then you go to the Dallas Mavericks game, second night of a back-to-back. Santi Aldama only played 21 minutes, in part because Taylor Jenkins pulled the plug pretty early in that game. But you look at Jake LaRavia, 22 minutes. David Roddy, 23 minutes. So that means David Roddy, in a competitive game and a non-competitive game, he played 46 minutes across 2 games for the Memphis Grizzlies. That is not a measure. That is not a formula for winning basketball. It just isn't on a consistent basis to play a rookie like Roddy that much. It's the reality of the Grizzlies situation. They have to play these dudes. Would I rather see Roddy than Kenneth Lofton Jr. or Vince Williams? Yeah, I would, because I think Roddy is better than those 2 guys right now. And obviously, Kenneth Lofton Jr. plays a different position as a true 4-5 than Roddy, who's a little more positionless. But these guys have to eat minutes somewhere. And even though Roddy did some good things against the Houston Rockets, I'll look at his line from his 23-point game. He had, 23-minute game against Houston. He was 3 for 6 from the field, 8 points, 2 rebounds, 1 steal. But he still had 2 turnovers. 4 fouls in 23 minutes of play. He wasn't some electric stop everything guy for this team. So when you replace the Roddy minutes with Zaire Williams minutes, when you replace the Aldama minutes with Jaren Jackson Jr. minutes, and Aldama takes some time off of, Xavier Tillman or LaRavia or Clark, when you see these actual key rotation players, that was the main argument for the entire Grizzlies are going to be fine argument when Kyle Anderson and DeAnthony Melton were gone. They still have depth. That's a fair argument to make, but they don't have depth right now. You can't say they have depth right now when 3 of their best 7 players are out. And again, 2 of those 3 in Jaren and Dillon are proven defensively strong players. Zaire Williams has been given tough assignments like Steph Curry and other proven scoring wings as a young player, and he's 6'9" as a true perimeter athlete. He's not a stretch 4. He can play the 2 at 6'9". That size matters. They don't have that right now in the backcourt. They have Desmond Bane, who's 6'5", 6'6", and John Conchar, who's a similar size. They do not have the length. Dillon Brooks is 6'7". He is built in a different way than Conchar and Bane are. Zaire, 6'9". Jaren Jackson Jr., 6'11", and has the athleticism and the frame to be able to play on the perimeter and switch. They are missing pretty important pieces to the puzzle. That context has to remain in the forefront of our thoughts. But Houston, 122 points. The Dallas Mavericks beating the brakes off the Grizzlies, 137 points, a 41-point win. The margin doesn't matter as much. It really doesn't, because of all of the things that we've outlined. Third game in 4 nights. Dallas being well rested. The Grizzlies being without 3 of their best 7 or 8 players. All of those things matter. But I'm telling you, in film sessions, Taylor Jenkins is telling his team this is not Memphis Grizzlies basketball. The way that we're defending the perimeter, the way that we're missing rotations, the way that we are not finding one another in terms of our movement and communication defensively, that was the biggest concern for me. Could the Grizzlies shoot better from 3? Absolutely, right? They struggled against the Mavericks in particular. They had a good night against the Rockets. The Rockets are not the best perimeter defensive team either. Dallas is much better. Dallas is much better defensively. And I think that tired legs and that improved opponent all combined to the Grizzlies really struggling against the Mavericks. So kudos to Dallas. They play the schedule in front of them. There will be times where Dallas is in tough spots. Early in the season, the Mavericks had the advantage here. The next time these two teams see each other, it won't be until March. And then they play literally in 10 days, they play 3 times, 2 of them on national television. So those 3 games might be pretty important for playoff seeding coming up here. Hopefully the Memphis Grizzlies are healthier, which is a major concern of mine coming out of Texas. And hopefully the Grizzlies are in a position to play better defense, because if they're not, it's going to be a similar outcome. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game-to-Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. In this final segment, I'm going to talk about the Brooklyn Nets, things to look for going into this game. But before I get to that, I want to shout out one of my favorite services, one of my favorite sources for basketball, football, and all sorts of other betting information as we enter this basketball season, betonline.net. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every single game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including the Major League Baseball playoffs, football, mixed martial arts, boxing, golf, and, of course, the NBA. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. The Memphis Grizzlies back at it at home tonight. It's a hoop night in Hoop City. The Brooklyn Nets are coming to town, and the Brooklyn Nets are fascinating to me. Obviously, the vibes, we can't compare the vibes, right? The vibes in Memphis, vastly superior to the vibes in Brooklyn. All the issues with Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons, the Reclamation Project. There's lots of stuff not going well for Brooklyn going into this game. As unhealthy as the Grizzlies seem to be, Desmond Bane still not on the injury reports. We can assume that Bane is going to play, but he doesn't look right. Whether it's cramping, whether it's his back issue from the playoffs back last spring, whatever's going on with Desmond, something's up. And hopefully he's able to overcome that and have a good performance. Hopefully the day off, he got treatment, got some rest. We see a better, more improved Desmond Bane. I'm not worried about Des just yet, but I do think it's fair to point out he hasn't really lived up to what the Grizzlies need him to be in their current state of things. 3 of 16 against the Houston Rockets. He was, he was 4 of 11 against the Mavericks in 27 minutes of play. So a little bit better against Dallas, but that was in a losing effort, right? His stats were futile since the team struggled so much, especially on the defensive end. They need Bane to be a legitimate all-star-esque player if they hope to knock off teams like the Brooklyn Nets, who are riddled with all-star talent, Hall of Fame talent, you can argue, when it comes to Kevin Durant in particular. Most recent game for Brooklyn, they took on the Toronto Raptors. It was a big win for the Nets, 109-105. Pascal Siakam went off. So that's a positive thing for the Grizzlies. They'll have some openings there in the front court potentially. Santi Aldama obviously isn't that elite of a player, but maybe they can get him some open looks and take advantage of some weaknesses there in the front court with the Nets defense. But Durant had 27 points on 18 shots. Kyrie Irving had 30 points on 24 shots, 7 assists. Durant had 6 assists. Ben Simmons, the much maligned Ben Simmons, in his second game in Brooklyn, looked much better. Obviously not an offensive weapon per se, but 10 rebounds, 8 assists, 6 points, 2 blocks. He's a very good defender, great frame. It allows for the Nets to do some pretty unique things with their front court and back court, depending on how they play Simmons. That's something to watch in this game. And then you look at their bench. The Nets are going to run their starters pretty heavily. Simmons is the only starter that played less than 33 minutes. You had, Nick Claxton for Brooklyn playing 34 minutes, 19 points, 11 rebounds, a strong front court presence for the Nets. Royce O'Neal played 39 minutes. Remember the random trade of Royce O'Neal to the Brooklyn team, and everyone was like, Kevin Durant is thinking about leaving. Why are you trading for Royce O'Neal? But from the Grizzlies matchups with the Jazz in the past, where Royce O'Neal comes from, O'Neal is a Jay Crowder-esque kind of player. Can shoot the three, can defend multiple positions. He had 2 steals and 2 blocks against Toronto. He can be a force on the defensive end. And that is really, again, between him and Simmons, Claxton as a rim protector. Kevin Durant is a strong rim protector. The Brooklyn Nets starters had over 10 blocks in this game. 2 for Durant, 2 for O'Neal, 4 for Claxton, 1 for Kyrie, and then 2 for Ben Simmons. So that, again, that puts you at 11 blocks across the 5 starters. That's pretty impressive for those guys. And they only go with a 9-man rotation, or at least that's what they did against Toronto. You have one of the Morris twins, Markieff Morris, there in Brooklyn now. Joe Harris got some live game action for the first time before he had injury issues. A couple of years ago, he was one of the best three-point shooters, if not the best three-point shooter in the entire NBA. So Joe Harris is still there in Brooklyn. Patty Mills, another elite three-point shooter. Grizzlies fans remember him from his days with the Spurs. He can still launch it from 3. In 11 minutes, he had 2 made threes on 4 attempts. And then you also have a young player by the name of Day'Ron Sharpe, who only played 10 minutes against Toronto, but he got 7 rebounds in those 10 minutes. He's energy off the bench. He's got a good frame. He's like a bigger Brandon Clark, and he can bring a lot of juice for the Nets, especially for a veteran team like them. That energy can be very positive on a Monday night in Memphis. Maybe it's hard for Brooklyn to get up a little bit. Don't be surprised if Day'Ron Sharpe comes in and brings some of that energy and that fight to get the Nets into the game early if necessary. This is a game where Ja needs to be Ja. That's going to sound like lazy analysis throughout this season, but it's the truth. Ja Morant has to be a superstar. He has to be the guy against the Rockets who scored 49 points on 26 shots. Until Jaren Jackson Jr. is back, until Dillon Brooks is back, who may be back in this game. As of this recording, he's questionable for the contest with that thigh injury. Zaire is still out. Jaren is still out, but perhaps Dillon Brooks does play. Remember, he was questionable against the Mavericks, and he sat. And that was pretty surprising because Dillon Brooks really likes to measure himself against players like Luka Doncic. He relishes that opportunity to compete against the very best in the NBA, but the decision was made to hold him out. Let's see what happens at home against Brooklyn. Another chance to go against the Kevin Durants, the Kyrie Irvings of the world offensively. So perhaps Dillon will see his debut for this season. And it wouldn't come, it would be very welcome, right? Because he is a guy who can create his own shot, who can defend. He can take some of the load off of Ja Morant. But until we see Dillon actually play the way we think he's capable of healthily, same thing with Desmond Bane, it's got to be the Ja Morant show. And you got to continue to get contributions from Jake LaRavia. You got to continue to see him have that sweet shot and make those attempts when he gets them. John Konchar's going to continue to see open looks. He has to be a force in that way. Guys that are playing outside of their ideal role are going to have to continue to step up. Now, the good news is for the Memphis Grizzlies, when you're at home, it's a lot easier to do that. The 2 games that just happened, the poor defense, the struggles, especially against Dallas, those were road games. Role players usually exceed what they normally do at home. They usually play better at home than they do away. If Dillon doesn't play, I think you can expect to see something more along the lines of what happened with the New York Knicks. I don't think the Grizzlies in their current state are going to blow out anybody, but I do think you'll see electric Ja Morant. Ben Simmons will probably try to take a shot at defending Morant. I think you'll see some Royce O'Neal, that sort of stuff. But it's going to be hard for the Nets to stick Ja. And if it is Simmons, that obviously takes one of the stronger rim protectors, one of the stronger switchable defensive guys in Simmons away, and it puts more pressure on Kyrie Irving and others to try to stick to their guys. So I do believe that Morant will still find ways to get his. It'll be interesting to see how Taylor Jenkins plays along with all those things. As I mentioned, I anticipate this looking a lot like the New York Knicks game, where the Grizzlies build a lead, the Nets come roaring back because of the talent they have. It's going to come down to the wire. I personally see a Grizzlies victory, but I don't think it's going to be easy. And if the Nets come into Memphis and somehow knock off the Grizzlies, again, if Dillon Brooks doesn't play, I think you could pick Brooklyn to win pretty confidently. If Dillon does play and he's able to give a normal allotment of minutes and effort, I think that's going to make all the difference because of what he can do defensively. He is that impactful for this Grizzlies team. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The next time you'll be chatting with me, you'll also be chatting with DeMichael Cole. Wonderful opportunity to have him back on. We'll be breaking down the Brooklyn Nets game, the good things, the bad things, who played, who didn't play, who played well, and who could have afforded to get a little bit more rest and practice reps and film sessions. We're going to talk about all those things and more as the season continues to grind forth. We are happy and proud to be part of the Locked On Network and your first listen each and every day. For my co-host, Michael, who will be back with me on the next show, I'm Joe Mullinax. Thank you so much. Again, continue to follow this team. Remember, it's early in the season. Call me at Christmas is my mindset. I want to see this team healthy first and foremost, but you want the competition to improve defensively as well. Hopefully that line of thinking aligns with what the Grizzlies do, and we see that from them on Monday night. Thanks again for listening. This is Locked On Grizzlies. Until next time, take it easy.